Hello, my beautiful Cancer souls. This reading is for Cancer Sun, Moon, Rising, and Venus. Take a moment to relax, breathe slowly, and open your heart to whatever messages may be coming through for you today. Take what resonates with your story and gently leave the rest behind. Okay, what I'm picking up right away is that there's someone here who's starting to see things very differently than they used to. It's almost like they're waking up to something they hadn't fully recognized before. And honestly, it doesn't feel like the connection itself is what's changed. It feels like you. Because the more they look at your energy, the more they realize you're not standing in the same place anymore. You're not carrying yourself the same way. You're not moving through life the same way. And wow, I don't think they were fully prepared for that realization. Because something about your energy feels different now. Stronger, calmer, more grounded. And the truth is, that shift is making them think about this situation far more than they probably want to admit. Because the more they look at your energy, Cancer, the more they realize you're not standing where you used to be anymore. And honestly, that realization seems to be making them think far more than they'd ever admit. I see this very clearly as the Moon card comes through. What's interesting is that this feels like someone who spent a long time avoiding the deeper parts of their own emotions. They got used to putting difficult conversations off for another day. Got used to telling themselves that somehow everything would work itself out. Got used to believing there would always be more time. But this feels different, really different. It's almost like they're finally facing something they never allowed themselves to face before. The fact that you're continuing with your life, the fact that you're moving forward, and the fact that this is no longer just a possibility. It's actually happening. I also see the Queen of Cups card sitting very close to the Moon card, and the energy here makes me think of someone who has been through a great deal emotionally, but no longer allows those emotions to control their entire world. And Cancer, I have to say, I feel like this person has been watching you, maybe not in an obvious way, maybe not in a way you would immediately notice, but they've been paying attention. They're noticing how differently you respond now. They're noticing how you no longer try to revive conversations that have already gone cold. How you're no longer constantly searching for explanations. How you're beginning to pour your energy back into yourself instead of pouring it into unanswered questions. And honestly, I think that's what's confusing them the most. Because somewhere in the back of their mind, they always assumed you'd still be there. Not because they looked down on you. Not because they didn't care, but because they became accustomed to your presence. Accustomed to the idea that no matter how complicated things became, this connection would somehow continue existing in the background. But the longer I sit with this reading, the more it feels like they're beginning to understand that nothing stays forever if it isn't appreciated. There's a moment here that stands out very strongly. It's like they're replaying all the times they chose silence. The times they knew they should have said something, but let the moment pass. The times they felt distance growing and convinced themselves they could deal with it later. And then the Judgment card appears, not loudly, not dramatically. It's more like a bell ringing in a very quiet room. A moment when someone can no longer pretend they haven't noticed what's right in front of them. Because the truth is, they're seeing you differently now, not the Cancer they knew months ago. Not the Cancer who always tried to understand everyone else before understanding themselves. Not the Cancer who constantly placed their own heart last. The person they're seeing now feels calmer, more grounded, more mature. And that's making them wonder something they don't particularly enjoy wondering. What if they're running out of time? Wow, that's not an easy realization. But it's a feeling that comes through very strongly here, especially as the Nine of Swords card appears. I don't see someone who's angry. I don't see someone who's trying to control the situation. I see someone who's thinking far too much. Someone lying awake longer than they should, wrestling with questions that don't have easy answers. What if Cancer truly isn't waiting anymore? What if things have genuinely changed this time? What if the distance between us isn't something that can be fixed with a few words? Because the thing that's troubling them isn't the idea that you hate them. The thing that's troubling them is the possibility that you're finding peace without them. And I know that probably sounds strange, but sometimes what wakes a person up isn't losing love. Sometimes it's realizing that the person they thought would always be there is learning how to live beautifully without waiting any longer. Something inside this person is beginning to shift, very slowly, very quietly, almost beneath the surface. But it's enough that they can no longer keep looking at this situation the same way they always have. And the more I look at the cards spread out here, the more it feels like they're standing in front of a truth they've been avoiding for a very long time. And the deeper I look into this energy, the more I feel like this isn't really a story about what's happening right now. It's a story about what never happened, the conversations that should have taken place, the confessions that should have been spoken out loud, the moments when they knew they should have taken one more step forward, but chose to stay where they were instead. I see the Hermit card showing up here in a very particular way. It's like this person has spent a great deal of time living inside their own private world, not because they didn't care, not because they didn't feel this connection, but because there were emotions they didn't know how to name, fears they didn't even want to look at themselves, and whenever things came too real, too close, or too important, they would pull back. They kept telling themselves they needed more time, more answers, more certainty. But time has a strange way of uncovering the very things we try hardest to forget, because what I'm seeing now is that memories are coming back, not in the way they would have chosen, but in a way they can't seem to control. A song they hear unexpectedly, a familiar place, a quiet moment in the middle of the day, a stranger's face that somehow reminds them of you. And then the Six of Cups card appears. Wow. I can almost feel their energy soften when this card comes through, because they're remembering who the two of you were before everything became complicated, before the misunderstandings, before the distance, before fear, pride, or personal struggles started standing between this connection. There are memories they genuinely believed they had left behind. But the truth is, those memories never disappeared. They were simply waiting quietly for the right moment to return. And what's really standing out to me is that the more they revisit those memories, the more they're beginning to see things through Cancer's eyes. And honestly, that isn't easy for them, not at all. Because sometimes, in order to understand someone else's feelings, we first have to face the places where we fell short ourselves. I see that very clearly as the Five of Cups card comes through. This doesn't feel like loud regret. It doesn't feel like someone dramatically announcing they were wrong. It's quieter than that. It's the feeling of sitting alone and suddenly realizing, I wish I had handled that differently. I wish I had been more honest. I wish I hadn't been so afraid. I wish I had understood what they were trying to tell me. There are nights when they replay old conversations, remembering the times you tried to explain something, and realizing they weren't truly listening. There are moments when they remember your patience, your kindness, the opportunities you gave them, the doors you left open. And then they find themselves wondering whether those doors are still open now. Because the difference is, they no longer see Cancer as someone who will always be there. They're beginning to realize that you have limits too, that you get tired too, that you know when it's time to let go. And that's exactly where the Eight of Cups card starts appearing in this reading. There's something about that energy that's making them uneasy, not because of something you've said, but because of what they're feeling. They're feeling the change, a very quiet change, a very mature change, a very Cancer kind of change. The energy of someone who no longer feels the need to convince anyone to understand them. Someone who's simply continuing forward, living their life, taking care of themselves, moving one step at a time. And for the first time in a very long while, this person is starting to wonder whether they're watching your silhouette slowly disappear from the landscape of their life. Because deep down, they know there's a very big difference between someone always being there and someone actively choosing to stay. And honestly, I think that realization is changing far more inside this person than they expected. Because there's a huge difference between being afraid of losing someone and truly understanding why you could lose them. What I'm picking up from this reading is that they're no longer focused only on the outcome. They're starting to look at the cause, starting to look at the patterns that have repeated themselves throughout their life. The familiar reactions, the defense mechanisms they've carried for far too long, the times they pulled away when emotions became too intense, the times they stayed silent when honesty would have been easier in the long run, the times they retreated into their own world and hoped other people would somehow understand without them having to explain. And right at the center of all of this, the Death card appears, not dramatically, not like some huge emotional explosion. It's quieter than that. It's the feeling of someone sitting alone and suddenly realizing they can't keep living the same way they've always lived. Not because someone is forcing them to change, not because they're trying to impress Cancer, but because they're becoming tired of the cycle themselves. Tired of letting fear make every important decision. Tired of trying to control things that were never fully within their control. Tired of protecting themselves so much that they end up hurting the very things they care about most. It feels like they're looking back at an older version of themselves. A version that believed avoidance was safety. That distance was safety. That staying silent was safety. But now they're beginning to understand that those choices came with a cost too. And maybe the cost is the distance they're feeling from cancer right now. What's interesting is that I don't see them fighting this process anymore. Of course, there are still difficult days. Still moments when they want to slip back into old habits. Moments when they want to pretend none of this matters that much. Moments when they want to convince themselves they're completely fine. But then the strength card comes through. And this isn't the kind of strength people usually show the world. It's not about proving anything. It's not about winning. It's not about appearing fearless. It's a much quieter kind of strength. The kind that shows up when someone finally has the courage to sit with the emotions they've spent years running from. And honestly, I think that's exactly what's happening here. This person is beginning to face themselves, beginning to look directly at the parts that still need healing, the old wounds, the old insecurities, the stories they've carried for far longer than they realize. And the deeper I go into this reading, the more it feels like cancer has unintentionally become a mirror for them. Not because you tried to teach them something, not because you tried to change them, but simply because your presence brought certain truths into focus, truths they may never have noticed otherwise. And once someone starts seeing those parts of themselves, real change becomes very difficult to ignore. I see the Eight of Pentacles card appearing here as a really beautiful image, because this doesn't feel like a transformation that happens overnight. It doesn't feel impulsive. It doesn't feel rushed. It feels like someone quietly working on themselves one piece at a time, one step at a time. Some days they move forward. Some days they slow down. Some days they're full of doubt. Some days everything feels clearer, but they keep going. They keep trying. They keep learning how to become a more mature version of themselves than they were yesterday. And then the Temperance card appears. Wow. This energy feels like someone finally learning the balance they've been searching for all along without really understanding how to create it. Because in the past, they often lived at the extremes, either too close or too distant, too controlling or completely detached, holding everything inside or waiting until everything spilled over. But what I'm seeing now is different. They're learning how to exist somewhere in the middle ground of honesty, the middle ground of maturity, the middle ground of feeling something deeply without allowing fear to make every decision. And the more I sit with this energy, the more it feels like this person is beginning to understand something important. That real change isn't about whether they can hold on to cancer. It's about whether they have the courage to become the person they were meant to grow into a long time ago. And I honestly think that question is leading them somewhere completely new in this journey. Because when someone begins changing on the inside, they also start looking at the future through a different lens. What stands out to me here is that this person is no longer thinking only about what was lost. They're no longer stuck replaying everything they wish they had done differently. Their mind seems to be turning towards something else now, something they once avoided. They're starting to wonder what would happen if they truly opened their heart this time, if they didn't run, if they allowed cancer into the deepest parts of their life. I see the Six of Cups card appearing again, almost like a bridge between the past and the future. And what's interesting is that they're not just remembering old memories anymore. Those memories are becoming the foundation for what they hope to build next. It's like they're looking back at moments when they felt understood and finally recognizing how valuable that feeling really was. Because not everyone makes them feel that way. Not everyone makes them want to lower the walls they've spent years building. And the deeper I sit with this energy, the more it feels like they're beginning to understand that real connection isn't about keeping people at a distance to protect yourself. It's about allowing someone to see who you truly are. What I'm feeling from them right now is incredibly soft, very sincere, very genuine. There's far less defensiveness here than before, far less need to prove anything. I see them beginning to think about sharing more of themselves, the stories they've never told, the wounds they've kept hidden, the fears they once believed nobody would understand. Because deep down, they're starting to hope that cancer might understand why they became the person they are today. Not so they can be forgiven, not so they can justify the past, but simply because they want to be seen honestly, fully, as they are. And then the Empress card comes through. Wow. There's something really beautiful about this shift. This person no longer sees cancer as something distant. They no longer see you as an opportunity that could disappear at any moment. Instead, it feels like they're beginning to see you as part of a life they want to create. Part of a bigger picture. Part of what brings them peace. Part of what inspires them to grow. Part of what encourages them to make better choices. Now, that doesn't mean they suddenly have all the answers. Honestly, I think they still have a lot to learn. But at least now they're allowing themselves to imagine something they once avoided imagining. A future where Cancer is present. A future where this connection has room to breathe and grow. And I see that even more clearly as the Four of Wands card appears, not in some dramatic or over-the-top way. It's actually much simpler than that. It feels like someone daydreaming about ordinary moments, sharing a meal together, spending an afternoon where neither person has to explain too much, having a conversation where both people feel safe, being in a space where no one feels the need to wear a mask. You know, I think they once believed happiness had to look extraordinary. But now they're starting to realize that some of the most meaningful things are surprisingly simple. Feeling comfortable around someone, feeling understood, feeling at home in someone's presence. And honestly, I think that's something Cancer brought into their life without even trying. The deeper I go into this reading, the more I feel like this person no longer wants to keep everything separated. In the past, they may have divided their life into compartments. One part for family, one part for friends, one part for work, one part for private emotions nobody was allowed to touch. But then the Ten of Pentacles card appears, and it almost feels like they're beginning to want all of those pieces to come together. Something inside them is saying, if someone truly matters to me, I don't want them standing outside my life anymore. I want them to see the whole picture. I want them to know where I come from. I want them to understand what shaped me. I want them to know the people who matter to me. I want them to become part of the world I've kept protected for so long. And what really stands out here is that this feeling doesn't seem to be coming from fear. It doesn't feel driven by panic about losing Cancer. It feels much more genuine than that. It feels like a sincere desire to move closer, to share more, to connect more deeply. Because for the first time in a very long time, this person is beginning to realize that there are doors within their heart that have never been fully opened. Maybe, just maybe, Cancer is the first person who's ever made them truly want to open those doors. And that brings me into a very different energy that's beginning to emerge in this reading. Because after all the thinking, all the memories, and all the interchanges we've been talking about, it feels like this person is starting to understand that not everything can be solved by thinking alone. Not every story can remain frozen in place forever. And not every connection can survive indefinitely in a state of waiting. Something is pushing them toward a different approach. I see that very clearly as the Two of Wands card appears. It's like they're standing at a crossroads. But unlike before, they're no longer looking at that crossroads with hesitation. They're looking at it seriously. Because for the first time, they're beginning to understand that choosing nothing is still a choice. Standing still creates a result too. And honestly, I think that's exactly what's been occupying their mind lately. It feels like they've spent a long time observing Cancer, observing themselves, observing everything that's happened between the two of you. But the longer they observe, the more they realize that some things can't be understood from a distance. Some answers only appear when you're willing to step forward. And that's where I see this person beginning to think differently. Not in terms of promises, not in terms of beautiful words, but in terms of action, real action. Because deep down, no Cancer has heard enough unfinished promises, enough explanations, enough maybe someday. What Cancer needs isn't another explanation. What Cancer needs is clarity. And somehow, for the first time, it feels like they're beginning to understand that. I really like the way the Ace of Wands card appears here, because it carries the energy of someone rediscovering a spark they thought they had lost. Like a fire that had been smoldering quietly for a very long time is finally beginning to glow again. Not because all their fears have disappeared, not because they've suddenly become perfect, but because what they feel for Cancer is becoming stronger than the reasons they've been using to delay. And that's a subtle but powerful shift. Before, they spent a lot of time wondering what might happen if they stepped forward. Now they're starting to wonder what might happen if they don't. And those are two very different questions, with two very different emotional weights. You know, the more I sit with this energy, the more it feels like this person is realizing they don't want to keep standing on the sidelines of their own life. They don't want to keep arriving too late. They don't want to keep looking at Cancer from a safe distance and wondering how things might have been different. And that feeling becomes even clearer as the Ace of Cups card appears. The energy here feels incredibly sincere, very gentle, very real. There's no sense of trying to impress anyone, no sense of trying to control the outcome. It's simply the energy of someone slowly accepting what they truly feel. And honestly, I think this may be the first time in a long time that they've stopped arguing with their own heart, stopped searching for reasons to deny it, stopped explaining away their emotions, stopped convincing themselves they should feel less than they actually do. They're beginning to admit that Cancer means more to them than they've ever said out loud, more than they've ever shown, more than they've allowed other people to know. And once that admission begins, it's very difficult for things to stay the same, because real feelings tend to create a desire for action. Not rushed action, not impulsive action, but action that comes from clarity. And that's exactly when the Chariot card appears. Wow, I can almost feel the movement in this energy. Like someone who's been standing in the same place for far too long is finally beginning to move forward. One step at a time, slowly, deliberately, with intention, with direction, with growing confidence. And what stands out to me most is that they're no longer focused on making everything perfect. They're focused on not missing what truly matters anymore. Because after everything that's happened, they're beginning to understand something important. Distance doesn't disappear on its own. Clarity doesn't magically arrive. Connection doesn't simply rebuild itself. Some things require a person to take a step forward, to make a choice, to show up. And honestly, I think they're standing very close to that moment now. That moment when they finally stop resisting what they've known deep down all along and admit that their heart made a decision long before their mind was ready to agree with it. And honestly, I think this is the point where the energy of the reading begins to change completely. Because for such a long time, this person seems to have been focused on what they feared. Fear of getting hurt, fear of disappointment, fear of losing control, fear of investing too much of themselves into something and not receiving the outcome they hoped for. But what I'm seeing now feels different. They're no longer focused only on what they could lose. They're beginning to focus on what truly matters. And Cancer, I think this is the moment when they're starting to understand your place in their life more clearly than ever before. I see the King of Cups card appearing with such mature energy, very calm, very steady, very deep. Gone is some of the emotional turbulence that seemed to define earlier chapters of this story. Gone is that instinct to run whenever things become too real. It's almost like this person is learning how to stay with what they feel, learning how to accept their emotions instead of constantly fighting them. And that's a significant shift. Because one thing I'm noticing very clearly is that they no longer see Cancer as a question that needs an answer. They're beginning to see you as an important part of their life, a source of peace, a source of growth, a reminder of how meaningful genuine connection can be. And once that realization settles in, their thoughts begin stretching much farther into the future, far beyond where they used to go. This isn't just about the next conversation anymore. It's not just about the next step. It's not only about closing the distance. It feels like they're starting to see the bigger picture, a picture that includes stability, maturity, and the possibility of building something that lasts. That's exactly when the Hierophant card comes through. And interestingly, it doesn't feel like a promise. It doesn't feel like someone making grand declarations. It feels more like a change in perspective, a change in how they view this connection altogether. Because there were things they once took for granted, things they assumed could always be dealt with later, things they believed would still be there whenever they finally got around to them. But now they're beginning to understand that the things that matter most deserve appreciation while they're still present, not after they've become memories, not after they're gone. And what I find beautiful here is that this person seems to be learning how to build instead of simply react, learning how to nurture instead of endlessly waiting, learning how to stay present instead of disappearing whenever life becomes uncomfortable. And honestly, that kind of growth is powerful because it isn't coming from pressure, it's coming from maturity. I see that reflected again as the Six of Pentacles card appears. This energy makes me think about balance. Not perfect balance, not some flawless ideal, but a sincere desire to create balance. Because deep down, they know there were times when Cancer gave more, tried harder, waited longer, understood more. And it feels like they're finally beginning to recognize that. Not to punish themselves, not to drown in guilt, but to truly appreciate the value of what was given. You know, sometimes people don't fully understand the value of something until they imagine life without it. And I think this person has already passed through that realization, which is why the energy feels so different now. The confusion that appeared earlier in the reading doesn't feel nearly as strong. What I see now feels more mature, more grounded, more honest. And then the World card appears. Wow, I really love where this card lands in the story, because it doesn't feel like an ending. Not at all. It feels like an old cycle quietly coming to a close so something healthier can begin. Something wiser. Something built on lessons that neither person could have learned any other way. And the more I sit with this energy, the more it feels like this person is finally understanding something they never fully understood before. Cancer isn't special simply because you've always been there. Cancer is special because of the way you love, the way you're patient, the way you make people feel seen, the way you create space for others to be understood. And when someone truly begins to recognize that value, they also begin to realize this isn't the kind of connection they want to keep treating as something ordinary. Because some people enter our lives to teach us lessons. Some people change the way we see the world. And then there are the rare people who inspire us to become a better version of ourselves. And honestly, I think this person is slowly realizing that cancer belongs in that last category. And that realization seems to be opening an entirely new chapter in the way they see you, the way they see themselves, and the road that still stretches out ahead of them. And Cancer, whether this story reflects your situation completely or only touches a small part of it, I hope it has given you something meaningful to reflect on. Because sometimes the thing that changes everything isn't holding on to someone. It's the moment we begin choosing ourselves, the moment we begin healing, the moment we keep moving forward, and the moment we start believing that our worth doesn't depend on whether someone else recognizes it or not. If something in today's reading spoke to your heart, keep what resonates with your journey and gently let the rest fall away. Thank you so much for spending this time with me today. And honestly, thank you for allowing me to be part of your day. You are truly important to me. I appreciate every view, every comment, and every story you choose to share. They mean more than you probably realize. So please continue taking good care of yourself. Keep being patient with yourself. Keep honoring your own growth. And keep trusting the progress you're making, even when it feels slow. I'll be back very soon with another reading. Until then, be gentle with yourself. Be kind to your heart. And remember to give yourself the same compassion you so often give to everyone else. Take care, Cancer. Thank you for being here, and thank you for sharing this journey with me. Bye for now.